Hey everyone, let's talk about the lab we just had. First of all, like I said in the Slack, I'm sorry that my video got corrupted. So we're going to talk about it, and it's already done. But I had a video that I was going through the process, so I'm going to try and reiterate everything rather than just writing everything from the start again. So in this lab, what we needed to do was to create a new menu where we log our airplane, so we kind of have a persistent data. So when we close the application and we come back to it, the application will continue where it left off. And this is really important. Eventually, you'll do databases and other things to manage this. For now, we're going to create our own custom way of doing this. So let's get started. The first thing we needed to do was creating a new GUI. In this case, I created a menu GUI, as you could see here. Extends to JFrame. Inside of it, there's nothing much. We're using a box layout and inserting 3 buttons. These 3 buttons, I'm going to call the same method with a set action command like we do normally. So let me just start it, and then we're going to talk about every step. So inside this menu, we see it here. Let me close that. So inside this menu, we got 3 different things, and you could see them happening. The commands happening here. So if they get clicked, new action button or load. In the case of log, I ignored it. We'll talk about it in a little bit. I omitted that. Now, inside the new button, you'll notice I'm saying if it's not null, set the visibility to false, and then just create a new one. Why? Because if we don't set the visibility to false or exit that specific GUI, well, then we'll have many of them present. So what I mean by this, let me comment that out. So when we're clicking new, rather than restarting the airplane, it feels more like we're having more airplanes. So by making one of them, let's say visibility false, we could hide that one, let it move on. For now, this is a good enough way. And we get a brand new GUI without all of these similar ones. Right? So this is why we wanted this line. Let me just show you what it would look like. And we do the same thing for the load, but the load in this case is a bit different. But let me just do this. So we got one airplane, and the moment I click on it, that one's visibility goes off, and we get a brand new one. Now for load, you'll notice that load for the GUI constructor, we changed it that it has a Boolean parameter, which is either false or true. And you could see that the variable name that I set to it is called load from file. So let's go check that out. So if when we call this GUI, we create a new airplane. And if we're not loading from file, if the file exists, I want to get rid of it. So sorry, it's not this file. We'll run it and we'll see it. The file exists, meaning basically the log I'm creating about my airplane. So if it's a brand new airplane, I want to delete that log. I'm going to start away from new. If it's not brand new, we're going to call this method load from file, which is basically going to go through it and figure out which command to initiate. So depending on the command on that line, we're going to do one of these things. Why we're doing this? So that we bring back the airplane to the state that it was left in a really quick manner. So let me see what I mean by this. So let's say if I say new airplane and I press start motor, take off, increase, and we're at 5,000. First thing you'll notice, we'll come to our IDE. It's going to refresh for a second. We're going to get airplane.txt. The way I did it is I used each line for a new command. And if we wanted to, we could add more to it, such as let's say a colon, and we could represent maybe the value that it increased. We could maybe represent if it broke by something, like let's say the airplane exploded, right? The way we built this text file is up to us. Remember that. Forget what I'm showing you. Define your own rules and go with that. If you always just follow along, it's not going to help you out. Figure out what you need. Figure out how you want to represent it in the easiest format that you know of. And later on, as you learn more and more, you'll understand why people did it in a different format. Why is that thing built that way? but you need to have your own idea set, your own rules defined to be able to do the next steps. So anyway, where's my airplane? So as we do things, let's say I decrease, increase, decrease, decrease, you'll notice that it's going to be added to my file as it gets going. How do we do this? Well, every time, I'm going to come back to that in a second. Every time, one second, here we go. Every time a button is clicked, right before we call the start engine, we're writing it to the log. And again, it's a simple command. Here, all we're doing is writing that message on a new line. Out.println, done. The same stuff we did in the lecture. Nothing crazy. So again, for each command, take off, increase, decrease, you'll notice there's a write log with an increase, decrease, so forth, so on. We didn't do anything about the exceptions in there. For now, there's no need. If you want to go ahead and do that, that's great. I've seen many of you guys who showed me varying ways of doing this, and it's really nice. And hopefully, if we have another course together, we'll start making it a bit more decoupled. We'll start doing some polymorphism, so we don't know who's coming in, who's logging it, etc. We don't need to know that information. By we, I mean the object itself. Like the GUI right now is super coupled with the file and is super coupled with airplane. Right? It cannot live without any of these. So this could be problematic. How do you fix that? We do this with polymorphism and a bit of a few techniques. We'll come back to it if we have another course together. You'll see this inside your future courses, obviously. So coming back to that. So having that file written like that, what we're doing is we're going through each line. We're taking each line and we split it. So here, if I added anything extra, I will go and check those out if need be. In this case, I didn't. I only have one word, which is the first word that comes in. So we either have stop, start, etc. You'll notice here something I've talked in the video that's broken. You notice here I called the methods rather than directly modifying the airplane values, rather than changing the attribute values, right? I could have directly went and changed, let me go on airplane. I could have went directly and changed the altitude, and I could have changed the status rather than calling those commands. The problem with that is when the altitude gets increased or when one of those status does happen, there's a lot of checking going on. There's a lot of logic going on. If this, do that, etc. This is important because it makes sure that our application is going in the right direction. Meaning, let's say, as an example, if I change, let's say if I reach 12,000 altitude, well, the airplane status needs to be changed to exploded. But the increase directly might not do that. Changing altitude to 12,000, you might forget status. You might forget that there's some restrictions. We don't know what it is. This is why these fields are private. And this is why we have these methods that are engaging or that are doing that task for us so that they could check whatever scenario they need to check, whatever logic they need to do, and make sure it runs smoothly. This is the same reason sometimes we have setters. With those setters, we define the rules for that specific field. We define what should happen to it when it gets called. Okay? But if we skip that, we'll get some issues. And I would have normally done that for you, but again, the video crashed. Anyway, moving on. So we go through it and notice that we're ignoring all of the exceptions in this case, in the loading case, because the user doesn't need to see anything. We don't need to do anything about it. Because again, we're trying to bring the new airplane back to the current state. So right now, the airplane is, let's say, at 7,000. I close. Sorry about that. I close my application. I run it again. And when I press load, it should be at 7,000, as you can see here. Now, one major issue that you might get is even though you load it correctly, the GUI itself does not show the correct values. So it doesn't show 7,000 What if you're, let's say you're at explosion and we press load, it should show that explosion. If it's not, it's because you forgot to load those values into those components. So when my constructor is run, notice that I first create my airplane and I set the values of that airplane to the current or the values that was stored. And then I create my components. And finally, after that I loaded the airplane and I created all my components, I'm going to set the values of my components to the airplane values. And this was pretty straightforward. I basically set, let me put the airplane, oops, wrong thing. Coming back, I want to set the airplane. Let me just run it quickly. Doop, doop, doop. Let me close that. So if you look at the first two, this is the current altitude. This is the thing you see in red. This is the altitude progress bar, this blue bar that's vertical going from 0 to 12,000. Then I check, and this check, the next two parts, is to check if my color of airplane is changed. We could have done that in two ways. One was to get the altitude and match it the exploding altitude. We could have also done it with the status. I did both ways just to show you. The case for the altitude, it was better to use the altitude because the next part is to check if we should show a warning, which is the yellow color, right? Otherwise, set it back to black. Okay, this is the default. We could have even omitted this. It would still work fine because by default, it's black. The last part was to check if the picture should be changed. Again, if the airplane is exploded, we shouldn't show the airplane. We should show the boom. And that's it, right? So again, one more time. We set the values to our airplane. There we go. Then we create our components on the GUI. Now that we have our values and the components, we could go ahead and set the values to our components. And that's airplane, and that's 12 minutes. Not bad. The original video was 55. All right, I'll see you guys hopefully next semester or something else like that. Cheers, guys. Bye-bye.